Hi, my name is Paul Husbands and I work for Cognos Software in the UK pre-sales team. The purpose of this demonstration is to give you an insight into how Cognos Software can provide a deeper understanding of the data stored in your Maximo asset management system, which in turn can help business users to make better decisions. The demonstration that you're about to see is IBM Cognos 8 sitting over standard Maximo 7.1 data. We'll start by showing some of the end-user focused capabilities that IBM Cognos 8 software delivers around reporting an ad hoc query, and we will follow this up by following a story which focuses on our performance management capabilities and how we go about answering the three core questions of how is my business doing, why, and what should we be doing. First of all, I'm going to select the Start Center tab to continue. Within my Start Center you can see I have a number of different areas delivered through a zero footprint web-based portal. This is IBM Cognos Connection and is one of a number of different portal standards that are supported by IBM Cognos software. First of all, we have a number of metrics or key performance indicators that help me to understand how my business is doing. Lower down we have some charts that explain to me the number of outstanding work orders and where those work orders are actually situated, broken down by year. And then on the left hand side of the screen I've got a number of reports that are available to me to run, whether those are standard reports, whether they're my departmental reports, or whether they're reports that are more specific to me. The key thing is here that I'm bringing information from different areas of the business, and this might not include just Maximo, it might include areas of finance, it might include information about change requests from my product lifecycle management system, and it might include information from my financial budgeting systems as well. First of all, on the left hand side I've got a number of standard reports, and these reports are fairly similar to what comes with Maximo out of the box. So fairly standard list style report in this case that describes each of the assets, their asset number and description, where they're located, and the status of each of those assets and what priority rating they've been given. So that's a fairly standard type report. If we move more into some of the departmental reports, one of the areas that I might be interested in looking at is labour efficiency. And when I'm looking at labour efficiency, what I'm focusing on here is, from my work orders in the system, how much time I've actually spent working on each of those orders compared with what I estimated them, the time that required. In that case, by dividing one by the other to get a ratio, we can look at the labour efficiency and find out whether we're actually under forecasting or over forecasting the amount of work that's available to us. And this can have an impact on the amount of direct or indirect labour that we have to schedule against the jobs if we're to complete things like our preventative maintenance schedule in time. Look into this in more detail. We can start looking at something like our forecast labour costs. In this case, again driven by our work orders, we're looking at a light blue line that's describing the actual labour costs that we've incurred so far, up until a cut-off point where we can see that line turns to a different coloured blue, and that's the period of time really which represents now, and we get to a point where we're cutting off the actuals that are entered against work orders that have actually taken place and been completed or in progress, and we start looking at the estimates for the work orders that are either approved or not scheduled yet and they're waiting to be scheduled, moving into the forward. And by comparing these two numbers together and charting them together, I can get a view of my entire labour forecast across the entire year based on what's happened so far and what's scheduled to happen in the future. As well as doing simple charts, we can combine charts together in a dashboard view of our data, and in these dashboard style reports we could be bringing information again not just from our asset management system but also from our product lifecycle management system. We might want to bring in depreciation information of our assets from our financial ledgers and bring those items of information together to give a consolidated view of what's actually happening. So in this case I've just got a simple breakdown of the number of assets in each of my sites within Maximo. You can see there the Bedford site holds most of that information, and I can see there a breakdown of whether those assets are actually in operation, whether they've been decommissioned already, whether they're waiting to be commissioned and not ready to start working yet. We've also got a breakdown of the assets by type, the different ticket counts and their various statuses, and also a list that just highlights any of my assets that have currently got more than one outstanding ticket against them. One of the areas that we've tried to focus on a little bit is in the general ledger and the chart of accounts that's created within Maximo when a new system's set up. So within that chart of accounts you can describe a number of elements to the chart of accounts, and in the standard demo system these are described as the cost centers and the activities. So one of the things against a work order, for example, that we've looked to do is break out that cost center activity information and deliver it in terms of fairly standard financial looking reports like income statements or balance sheets. For some of our users, the ability to just go through and run a report is often all they need, and they can consume reports in this way. But more often than not, we'd like to go through and start selecting items, filtering down our reports. And in this case we've got a report that allows us to look at the response times, but also allows us to drive through a number of prompts first so we can filter down the information that we want to see. In this case now I've chosen 5, as 5 represents the highest priority that an asset or an order can actually have within the Maximo system. And having selected that asset priority 5, I can go through and choose the dates that I'm specifically interested in. In this case I could go down to the individual quarters or months within the asset management system, but at the moment I'm just going to look at the full year of 2009. And within 2009 I'm just going to pick up the Needham site so I can see which orders we've completed, and then click on finish to actually bring through the result. And you can see there that those prompt values have just been replayed back to me. The fact that I chose an asset priority of 5, the work date, the center description, and the work status, and there I can see the response time variances broken down by the cost center activities. So for things like environment furnishing, heating, ventilation and air conditioning, general metering and noise reduction. And I can also see that information charted as well to give myself a more graphical view of how this looks. Now most of our users will just enjoy the ability to click on reports, to enter some prompt values and see the output and gain an understanding of what's happening. But sometimes our users need to be able to create their own reports, and this is where we have a capability that enables a business user to go through and create their own ad hoc query to help them get an understanding of a specific area of data that they might be interested in, without having to wait to go back to IT and ask them to export the data or to get hold of the data for them. In this case I'm going to focus on the business view in my area, and in this ad hoc environment it's very much intended for business users. So many of the buttons that we'll see, like new, open, save, save as, cut, copy, delete, undo, redo, play the report, filter the report, will be familiar to most users, as will most of these second line toolbar items around formatting the font with different sizes, different fonts, background colours, bold, italic and underline. Within my work order detail area I can drop down to see the different insertable items I've got. So in this case I've got the different types of work that just with a simple drag and drop gesture I can drag into the body of my report, and you can see that information comes back straight away. So I've got my different work types like preventative maintenance, emergency or corrective maintenance, as well as some of the more significant capital type projects. So the next thing I'm going to do is add one of my measures. I've got a number of measures down here like the count, downtime, repair time. So I'm going to drop in the count, and what this count actually shows me is an aggregated count of all of the orders that I've had on my system since we actually started working. So what I can do is drag a current year filter, which will actually make that number reduce down from 9,500 to the actual value of orders that I've got on the go at the moment for this year and this year alone. Now I need to add a second metric, which is the downtime metric, and in this case we're specifically going to look at doing some more in-depth understanding of what's happening with our downtimes. And what I might be interested in is understanding the average downtime for each of my different types of work. And the way I create that average downtime is by taking my total value of downtime, and just with a control click I've just highlighted the total count now, and I can choose the calculate button, which just allows me to create a calculation. And this time I'm going to choose division, and I want it to be my downtime divided by count, and I'm just going to rename this new column to be the average downtime. click on insert, and we can see that the average downtime value has been put in. At this point I don't have to keep any calculations, so just by highlighting them both again and clicking on the delete key, I can actually remove the count and downtime that I've used to create this average downtime calculation. There's two things that I can notice here. First of all, I've got a lot of decimal places, and when I'm talking about quite high numbers, those decimal places are less relevant to me. But the second thing that I can notice is that the default action in terms of aggregation for the average downtime has been set to total up, and what I'd really like to see is that value averaged out across all of the different types of work. So just by highlighting the column and right clicking, I've got a number of items that I can choose. The first one is format the data, where I can just determine that I want 0 decimal places, but I would quite like to keep that thousand separator in to help me read the numbers more easily. So we can remove the decimal places, and then the second thing that I can do is just right click again and go into the summarize menu, and from the advanced tab I can just choose that instead of totaling those values, I'm just going to average them out. So our 29,000 total figure will move down to a far lower average figure of 4,253. Now at this point I'm going to add the work priority into this particular report, and now what you can see is a breakdown of all of those work priorities for each type of work, and I can group the work types to give me a list that's grouped with each of my priorities. You can see those have come out nicely in ascending order, but what I might be more interested in is seeing those in descending order with the work priority 5 at the top as the highest priority. So I can just choose to filter in descending format and see those numbers actually reversed. So my number 5's come to the top. Or a different way of looking at this might be to take those work priorities and actually pivot them round into a cross tab, which allows me to see all of the information in this report in a very small piece of space. So there we see it, each of the summary work types along the rows and along the columns in a descending format. We've got the priorities. Now what I might like to do is highlight any of those that are out of a tolerance that I've got, and that tolerance might be 2,500 for, or more than 2,500 for things that are bad, and below 1,000 for things that are good. So if I just provide some custom highlighting that says anything above 2,500 is poor, below 1,000 from the default standard format, so we've got that nice red colour to identify poor, green to identify good, and we're just going to create our own style here for the values, and we can choose black for the font colour and yellow for the background colour, and that gives us that in between. So we've got a nice red, yellow and green that helps us easily understand what's going well and what's not going so well. And just very quickly, by highlighting those different values, what we can see very quickly is that our corrective maintenance work and our emergency maintenance work, we seem to be having a higher than expected average downtime, and those are certainly the areas where I'd want to focus on to go and look at how I can improve those downtimes and make sure that my machines are up and running and being productive for the most time. So let's just exit out of our ad hoc query here. I'm not going to save the changes to this report. It's ad hoc by nature, and quite often ad hoc reports do just get thrown away when they've been finished with. Now what I'd like to do is focus on some of the metrics or key performance indicators. This is what we call a watch list. In this case I've got a number of key performance indicators where I can see against each one the status of the metric, whether it's red, yellow or green, where green is good and red is bad, just the same as what we did with the ad hoc query. And I can also see the trend of these metrics to see how well they're doing. In this case I've got some that are getting worse, but also some that are getting better. One of the areas that we're interested in, and we've already looked at the labour forecast for the rest of the year, I've got a red metric here for my Needham site that tells me that my full year costs for preventative maintenance are above the budgets that we've set out by 4.5%. You can see that 4.5% value just here. So I'm going to go and have a look at those in more detail. I'm just going to maximise the screen here, and we get a greater focus on that Needham site full year preventative maintenance cost. And what this metric's telling me, this metric takes into account the actual costs, the actual labour costs of work orders that have been completed so far at the Needham site that are of the work type preventative maintenance, and it adds those to all of the estimates for the rest of the year, and it compares that total value against the full year budget value. And in this case we can see that whilst we are moving in the right direction, we're quite a long way above the target value that's been set by finance at the start of the year when we went through the budgeting process. And we can see there as a benchmark figure we've got the estimate value that was the original estimate set at the start of the year. So we're not doing too well here. What's important against this metric, as well as being able to see the actuals and the targets, I can also see who owns it. So if I need to go and talk to Colin and find out, what he's actually doing about this metric, I can. I could drop him a little message in here, or add a comment to see what he's done, or maybe look at some comments that Colin might have added, or I can go and see if there's any actions outstanding that have been put in place to correct this particular metric. Also along the top I've got a diagrams tab, and when I look at the diagram I get to see a view of what this metric is impacting and what it's been impacted by. And it goes without saying that if our maintenance costs are going above budget and slightly out of control, that's going to have a direct impact on my income statement or profit and loss plan at some point during the year. Moving backwards and looking at the metrics that are impacting my preventative maintenance costs, I can see there that I've got another red metric, which is the air conditioning room maintenance cost, and I can see a chart fly out for that tells me how well that's doing or how badly that's doing. And we can see there in summary that's quite a bit worse than the targets and is fluctuating up and down. So by navigating through to that metric I can look at it in more detail. First of all, I might choose to look at the history, the same as we looked at the history, and there you can see that chart reflected, showing us that we're much higher than the original target that was set for the air conditioning maintenance schedule moving forward. At this point I might want to go and have a look to see if there's any reports for this particular metric. At this point I'm just going to pause. So at this point I said I can go and have a look at any associated reports that are tied into this particular metric. In this case we've got two. We've got a default works order analysis and another report about air conditioning that we'll go and look at later. I can just open this report up in my analysis environment, which allows me to go and start exploring and analysing the information. For anyone that's familiar with Maximo from days of old, Maximo version 4, there were a number of power play cubes that were called Maximo Analyzer, and this is based on one of those cubes. This is the work and equipment cube, or work and asset cube as it would be called now. And in this case you can see down my left hand side I've got the different locations that I'm working with, and also across the top I've got my time periods at the moment summarised to the top level, which is on a year by year basis. I can add, if I want, different charts into this view to give me visualization of how well things are going. It's sometimes easier to look at that in a visual way rather than just a cross tab of information. I can swap around the rows and columns. Okay, I can see that most things are happening there at my Needham site. So I'm just going to swap those back and just remove the chart and just focus on the cross tab. And because we're interested in Needham, we're specifically interested in that air conditioning room, the first thing I'm going to do is drill down through two layers to focus specifically on air conditioning. At this point, one of the things I might want to do is not just only focus on the locations but also focus on the different cost centres. And because we've drilled into the Needham location, you'll see there that the only cost centre that we've actually got work orders outstanding for is that Needham cost centre. So we can drill down into the Needham cost centre, and in here we can see heating, ventilation and air conditioning as one of the activities that we might be working on in that air conditioning room. Okay, so where we're really interested in looking at is the fact that we want to focus on 2009, but I'm also interested in the status of some of the work orders. So I'm going to drag and drop the status onto that particular view. And when we do that, we can see the different statuses straight from Maximo, whether it's work complete, approved, waiting scheduling, whether it's closed, cancelled. And there's two ways I can go with this analysis at this point. I can try and either understand what's happened in the past to make my particular metric not perform in the way that I want it to, or I can look at work that's scheduled to take place in the future, either work that's waiting to be approved, that's waiting to be scheduled, or that is actually approved, and understand what's happening in the future that I can actually have a positive influence and impact on to try and bring my air conditioning costs back into line for the preventative maintenance schedule. So because we're looking at preventative maintenance schedule, I might want to bring in now the different work types so that I can see preventative maintenance. And what I can see here is that actually most of this work is happening in my third quarter. So I'm just going to drill into the third quarter, not worry too much about the individual months. But at this point, all we've been looking at is the count of the works or of the work orders. And what I might be more focused on now is understanding from a cost point of view what costs around labour I'm forecasting to incur in that third quarter with all of those work orders that I've got scheduled. So just using a control click, I'm just going to take across the estimated labour cost and also the estimated contract labour cost to get a view of what's happening. I'm just going to quickly highlight both of those columns and use the calculate button to create a new calculated column, which I'll rename to be the total value. So there we have my total estimated labour cost, both for direct and indirect. And one of the things that we can do at this point, if we choose to, is just create a ranking where I'm going to look specifically at the top 5 items, but I want to rank it not by the count of work orders, by that total calculation that I've just created. Okay, no surprise that PM, preventative maintenance, at the top, but what's of interest to me is at the point that I drill into that preventative maintenance work type and I actually get down to the individual work orders that are taking place within the air conditioning room around preventative maintenance. And what I can see here quite obviously is that, and I'll just highlight those two values, is that quite a lot of the work that I'm doing is being done by external contractors. I'll just rename this calculation to just be something simple like percentage, and we can see that in most cases around or just slightly above or below 70% of the work that we're planning to do is being done by outside contractors rather than my own direct labour force. Now, given that all the activities is happening in Q3, that might be something that I want to have a look at. I had no activity in Q4, and I might be able to push some of these work orders back into Q4 to make better use of my own labour rather than having to go out to subcontractors. Now, when we looked at the metrics area, there were 2 reports. So let's go and take that second report and just open it up. And the second report just gives me a view of what's happening in that air conditioning room in terms of the work that's forecast just for the second half of the year. So it's just going to fire up for me here and show me the values on a chart. At this stage, one of the things I'm interested to do is go and have a look at my plan and understand how that plan can be impacted and where any changes might be made. At the moment I can only see the Needham site area in the workflow because that's the area that I'm actually responsible for the forecast and the budget and the area of the metrics that I'm responsible. So I'm just going to open this up, and there's just 3 areas in here to look at. The first one is the income statement for the Needham site, and we can see there traditional things like the sale, the cost of goods sold, and just an example of the capabilities of the planning environment. If we wanted to grow that value by 10%, then we can see the immediate change that it has. Or if I just reset that value, we can see it go back to the original value. What I'm really interested in at this point is the maintenance line, and the maintenance line has been driven by this budget area. It's got some maintenance estimates in it for what moves out into the rest of the year, and these estimates are driven by some items here. I'm just going to quickly change that have been calculated based on the actual work orders. So what we can see here, there's 3 work orders that are scheduled for September. If we just go back and have a look at our chart and refresh it now, we can see the report showing specifically what's in September. Okay, and there we have those values. So at this point I'm just going to take those values and say, well, we need to readdress this indirect labour problem that we've got going through July, August and September. And the way I'm going to do that is by looking at the orders that are in for September and maybe just rescheduling some of those out. So I might schedule one to push out into October, and I can determine from that I'll be able to use actually significantly less indirect labour, and because my direct labour costs are lower by the hourly rate, it won't cost me quite so much. And similarly, I might do a similar thing in November for this particular metric, and again I might decide that I can now manage all of that with about £1,500 worth of direct labour and cut all of the indirect labour out. So I'm just going to save those values to the plan and then just go back into my viewer and rerun that report, and we'll see the impact of those changes there. Now we've done that, we can see that we've spread our costs slightly through October into November. In November we got rid of our indirect costs altogether, and the plan is that we're going to drive down those air conditioning room preventative maintenance costs through to the rest of the year by more accurately spreading the load of work orders and actually bringing that metric back into track. So I'm just going to close these views down now in here and take us back to our front screen and just remind ourselves what we've actually looked at here. So on our front screen we can see that we started off by looking at some of the straightforward business intelligence type activities that we can do, whether it was looking at list reports, some more sophisticated reports that show charts of actuals and estimates combined together, or whether we were looking at comparing different ratios of actual work against estimate work to give our labour efficiency ratios. We had an asset dashboard that took us into some more detailed charts which showed a breakdown of different assets, and we were allowed to look at financial reports as well as some prompted reports that allowed us to focus in on specific information. After that we went and looked at an ad hoc query where we were easily able to go down and start to understand what's driving our average downtime across the different work types and priorities. Something that we did that without any programming, without having to understand any underlying SQL. We added calculations, we added custom highlights to get that view. And then the final thing that we did was work through the performance management story, where we looked at how is our business doing, focused in on a specific metric that was showing up in red, and went further on to look at some analysis of why that particular metric or one of its impacting metrics was also not performing so well. And having understood why that was happening, we went into the planning environment and looked at our forward plan to understand what we should be doing to actually drive those costs down and bring us back in line. So that's our overview of Cognos working with IBM Cognos software working with Maximo Asset Management to provide greater insight and understanding into what's driving our assets and how we're going to manage the cost of those important assets as we look forward to the end of the year. And that's where this demonstration ends.